All right, let's get started. We have a capital allocation request on the desk today. The subject is the Lazy Sea Ranch in Bandera County, Texas. Acquisition price is $19.95 million. Now, before we even open the diligence file, I want to be very, very clear about the framing for this review. We need to be extremely disciplined here. There's not a lifestyle review. I'm not interested in the weekend barbecue potential or the aesthetic quality of the sunsets, not unless those factors translate directly into asset durability. This is a capital validation exercise, period.
Understood. We're evaluating this purely as a store of value vehicle. The lens is institutional. It's not recreational.
Exactly. The core thesis we're testing today is whether this specific asset can function as a water-dominant, unencumbered legacy estate, one with truly institutional characteristics. We're looking at a hold horizon of, 25 to 50 years. So the question is simple. Is this a viable place to park capital? Capital that needs to be defensive against inflation, but still offensive in terms of scarcity and real appreciation.
It's a capital preservation test, fundamentally. We're asking if the asset has the intrinsic physical, hydrological, and just as important, the legal characteristics to not only hold its value, but to compound real value. We're talking about purchasing power over a multi-generational timeline.
Correct. And looking at the preliminary data, my read is that this is primarily a hydrological play. It seems to be a very rare convergence of high-security water assets and remarkably tax-efficient carrying costs. It represents a genuine liquidity event for the current owners, which of course creates our entry point. So let's start there. The executive summary. What's the physical scope we're dealing with?
Okay. We're assessing approximately 705 acres, a little over actually. It's located in western Bandera County, right in the Sabinal River Valley. Geographically, it's positioned between the towns of Utopia and Vanderpool.
And for those who aren't familiar with that specific area?
For context, this area is often called the Swiss Alps of Texas. And, that's not just marketing hyperbole. It refers to the really dramatic elevation changes and the deep limestone canyon systems that define the topography. It creates a sort of natural barrier to entry, a high degree of seclusion. But you're still only about 90 minutes from San Antonio International.
Okay, so accessible but private. And the why now? What's the context for the sale after so long?
It's a classic liquidity event. The property has been under continuous family stewardship for nearly 40 years.
40 years?
Mm-hmm. It's actually a remnant of the original Gideon Thompson Pioneer holdings, which at their peak spanned over 30,000 acres. So what we're analyzing here is the last significant, contiguous, and diverse tract of that original estate finally coming to the open market.
Right. So we have a fragmentation narrative. This is a holdout piece of a much larger historical ranch. And that usually implies it retained the prime features, the filet mignon of the original holding, while the peripheral acreage was sold off over the decades.
That's a very common pattern, yes. The core assets are held until the very end.
Okay, that makes sense. Let's move immediately into the first pillar then. Scarcity and asset classification. I see the term institutional grade used in the prospectus. That's a term that gets thrown around pretty loosely in real estate, usually to describe anything expensive. I want to define the criteria. For this specific region, what makes a ranch truly institutional?
You're right to be skeptical. In this specific market, the Texas Hill Country institutional grade should be a binary classification. You either meet the full matrix of criteria or you don't. There's no partial credit.
So what's on the checklist?
First, we look at scale. It has to be over 700 contiguous acres. Anything smaller than that, and you risk being influenced by your neighbors. It can start to feel like a glorified subdivision. 700 acres is really the threshold for genuine privacy, for ecosystem control, the ability to manage your own viewshed.
And checking the survey, this one falls right at 705 acres, so it clears that first hurdle.
Correct. Second, and this is probably the hardest gate to pass, it requires significant live water. Specifically, our metric is 1 mile or more of dual bank river frontage.
Stop there for a second. I want to clarify dual bank for the record. Why does that specific distinction matter so much compared to just standard river frontage?
It's the difference between a border and a feature. Most river properties in Texas are boundary rivers. Your property line is the center of the stream, or maybe the gradient boundary on one bank. That means you look across the water at a neighbor. You share the resource. You share the noise. You share the access.
So half the experience is out of your control.
Completely. Dual bank means you own both sides of the river. The river flows through your property, not just alongside it. You control the viewshed, you control the access points, you control the security on both banks. It effectively turns the river into a private water park rather than a shared fence line.
Which, from a valuation standpoint, effectively doubles the value of the water because you've eliminated the entire neighbor risk component.
Precisely. It's a privacy mode. If you only own one side, you have zero control over what happens 50 feet away on that opposite bank. Someone could build a deck, they could clear-cut the trees, they could set up a campsite right across from your main house. Dual bank control eliminates that variable entirely. It secures the visual and the acoustic integrity of the entire water asset.
Understood. It's a critical distinction. What else is on the matrix for institutional grade?
Moving down the list, the asset has to have stabilized improvements of over 20,000 square feet. It cannot be raw land that requires a complex, multi-year, and high-risk construction project. It needs to be turnkey.
Ready to use from day one.
Yes. Next, aviation access. Specifically a hangar and a functional grass strip. This is a practical requirement for ensuring accessibility for high net worth principals who may not want to or have the time to drive 2 hours from a commercial airport.
A logistical necessity at this price point.
It also requires high-speed connectivity, which, used to be a major hurdle in these areas. Now it's largely solved by Starlink infrastructure, but it's still a requisite box you have to check. And finally, the title. It absolutely must be fee simple and unencumbered. That means no pre-existing conservation easements that would limit future utility or development rights.
That is a very tight filter. So if you run a search query for the entire Texas Hill Country right now, taking this property out of the equation, how many properties actually hit every single one of those marks?
It's virtually zero. You might find 700 acres, but it'll be dry. It won't have the river. You can find the river, but it'll be on 50 acres with neighbors on all sides.
Yeah.
You might even find the improvements, but they'll be on a dry divide without the water security. Finding the water, the scale, the turnkey infrastructure, the aviation access, and the clean title, all in a single deed. That is the very definition of statistical scarcity.
So we're positioning this as top percentile inventory. This isn't just land. It's a functioning private compound.
It's a developed, stabilized asset. That's the key distinction.
And from a capital deployment standpoint, that efficiency is critical. If I go buy, say, 10,000 acres in West Texas, I'm paying for a lot of dry scrub just to get a little bit of utility. My capital is diluted. Here, the valuation seems to be highly concentrated. I'm buying the core features, the water, the beds, the infrastructure, without spreading capital across thousands of acres of non-performing land. It's a density of value.
That's exactly the right way to view it. You're acquiring a high-density hydrological asset where every single acre contributes directly to the overall valuation.
Which brings us to the primary driver, the second pillar, the hydrological core. If the water isn't real, if it's not durable, the entire valuation collapses. Walk us through the technicals on the Sabinal River frontage.
This is the single most critical valuation metric of the entire asset. We have approximately 1 mile of the Sabinal River. We've already established a dual bank control, which is huge, but we need to look closer at the geology. The hydrology reports are very clear that this is a rock bottom system.
Okay, interpret that for the investment committee. Why do we care if the bottom of the river is rock or if it's mud?
Because rock bottom in this specific region implies an aquifer-fed origin. It means the water is literally rising up from limestone springs, specifically from interactions with the Edwards and Trinity aquifers. It's not primarily driven by surface runoff or rain events. Runoff rivers have mud bottoms. They're turbid, they flash flood violently, and they tend to dry up in droughts. Rock bottom rivers are clear, they're cool, and they're consistent because they're directly connected to the groundwater table.
So it's the fundamental difference between a drainage ditch and a natural spring.
That's a good way to put it. The clarity of the water is a direct result of that geological filtration. The water moves through hundreds of feet of limestone, which acts as a massive natural filter. The water quality reports we reviewed classify this as a pristine stream segment. To put a number on that, the phosphorus levels are persistently below 0.01 milligrams per liter.
That is incredibly low. What does that signify?
It puts it in the top 1% of all Texas streams. It indicates a total absence of upstream municipal discharge or heavy agricultural runoff. You're effectively at the headwaters. The source of the water is clean.
Okay, that's the river. It's robust. But we operate in a climate that is, prone to volatility. A single water source is a single point of failure. How robust is the redundancy architecture here?
It's institutional grade. Beyond the surface water, the property sits on top of significant groundwater resources. There are 4 operational water wells on site, providing domestic and livestock water. But there is one specific asset listed here that acts as a strategic multiplier. The dossier highlights one permitted irrigation well, which is regulated by the Bandera County River Authority.
Flag that. Why is a permit on a well so significant? I thought Texas was the rule of capture. You can pump what you want from your own land.
That's a common misconception that is rapidly changing. While rule of capture is the common law foundation, groundwater conservation districts, or GCDs, have the statutory authority to limit production to protect the aquifer. And obtaining a new permit for high-volume irrigation is becoming administratively difficult, and in some zones, frankly, impossible due to aquifer pressure concerns.
So a pre-existing permitted well is effectively a grandfathered asset.
It's a strategic asset. It legally secures the right to extract a certain volume for, say, landscape supplementation or irrigation, a right that likely would not be granted to a new applicant today. It's a huge de-risking factor against any future regulatory tightening. It ensures you can keep the core compound landscape alive, even if the river flow diminishes in a severe drought.
So we have the surface water rights from the river, and we have secured groundwater rights from the wells. The dossier also mentions 3 stock tanks on the property.
Correct, and a windmill-fed pond. These provide wildlife water redundancy across the entire acreage. It's a distributed system, not just one central source.
Good. Now, what about the bioindicators? The environmental audit mentioned Guadalupe bass and some specific bat colonies. Is that just nature trivia for the marketing brochure, or is it data?
No, it's absolutely data. It's forensic evidence. Guadalupe bass are the state fish of Texas, but they're also highly sensitive to water quality. They require cool, flowing, clean water. They simply don't survive in stagnant, polluted mud holes. Their persistent presence here validates the long-term health of the stream. And the bats, most likely Mexican freetails, indicate a robust insect population and a functioning cave ecosystem nearby. These are not just scenery, they are data points proving the biological integrity of this entire limestone aquifer system.
So, to put a grounding line on this entire section, what we're fundamentally looking at is cold, clear, swimmable water flowing over limestone in a drought-prone state. That is the commodity we're buying.
That is the core asset. Everything else, the houses, the hangar, the infrastructure, it's all just improvements built on top of that water.
Well, let's talk about those improvements. This brings us to the third pillar, replacement cost asymmetry. This is the financial logic of the build versus buy calculus.
And this is where the valuation becomes extremely compelling from a purely financial perspective.
We have a total of roughly 23,000 square feet of roofed infrastructure. Let's just list the scope for a moment. There's a main house at 3,451 square feet, a guest cabin at nearly 2,000, a river lodge at almost 1,700, a poolside cabana at 1,800, plus the hangar, a gym, a sauna, sports courts.
It's a massive footprint. It's not a house, it's a compound.
Exactly. So let's run the simulation. Suppose we pass on this deal. We decide we want to build this exact product ourselves to, save money or customize it. Step 1. Find 700 acres of comparable riverfront.
As we just discussed, that's highly difficult. It's likely impossible to find this quality of water on the market today.
But let's assume we get lucky, we find it. Step 2. Entitlements and permitting. You're dealing with the county, the river authority, the septic permits.
A bureaucratic maze. And you're doing all this in remote terrain. Vanderpool is not a suburb of a major city. You're bringing all of your crews in from San Antonio or Kerrville. The mobilization costs alone are a major premium. You're paying travel time, per diems, lodging. The logistics add 15, maybe 20% to the bottom line right off the bat.
Okay, step 3. Horizontal infrastructure. Drilling 4 water wells through solid limestone, trenching and running underground electric for miles into the ranch, installing the comms.
That's a year of work before you even pour a foundation.
Right. Then, step 4. Vertical construction. 23,000 square feet of luxury finishes. We're talking saltillo tile, standing seam metal roofs, heavy stone masonry. We are in a persistent labor shortage for skilled trades, and we're in a period of high construction cost inflation. What is the cost per square foot to build custom luxury in the Hill Country right now?
It's easily north of $400 a square foot. For this level of finish and this degree of remoteness, you're probably pushing $500, maybe even $600 a foot. Yeah. And that's assuming you can even get the high-quality crews to commit to the project. The opportunity cost of just managing that process is enormous.
And the final step, which people always forget, the landscape lag. You can build the house, but you can't build the 40-year-old live oak trees. You can't instantly build the stabilized turf and the mature landscape. You have to wait 5 to 10 years for the construction scars to heal and for the property to feel settled.
The time value of money is the absolute killer there. If you're tying up $20 million of capital for 5 years in the construction project, that capital's not enjoying the utility of the asset. For 5 years, you're not enjoying a ranch. You're managing a construction site.
Exactly. The conclusion here is simple. The recreation risk, the sheer hassle, cost overruns, and time risk of a 5-year build-it far exceeds the purchase risk of buying this finished asset. When you factor in the land value, the water value, and the hard replacement cost of 23,000 square feet, the asking price is very likely below the current replacement cost.
You're buying the finished product at a discount to the replication cost, and you're effectively getting the time, the permit history, and the headache for free.
Which is the only way I ever want to buy improved real estate. Okay, so the physical asset is sound. Let's look at the performance of the underlying asset class. Pillar 4, financial performance. We have data from the Texas Real Estate Research Center, specifically for what they call LMA 17 Land Market Area 17, which is the South Hill country.
This is the benchmark data for the region, yes. Since 1986, land in this specific sector has shown a nominal appreciation of approximately 10.7% annually.
10.5% nominal. That's a strong number. But we're sophisticated buyers, so we care about the real appreciation. What's the number after you strip out inflation?
Right. Adjusted for inflation, the real appreciation is approximately 6.9% annually, compounded over that same period.
Let's unpack that for a moment. 6.9% real growth. That's not just the number getting bigger. That's your actual purchasing power increasing year after year. That is significantly beating the CPI.
And you have to contrast that with holding cash, which today guarantees a loss of purchasing power every year. Or you can contrast it with equities, which might give you 7 or 8% real returns, but with massive volatility and, importantly, zero personal utility.
That is the key distinction. This is what we call a defensive hard asset. It's tangible, you can stand on it. If the market crashes tomorrow, you still own the water and you still own the land. But it has an offensive growth history. It has historically performed like a growth stock in terms of appreciation.
And it's important to add, in a high inflation environment, assets with scarcity, compression-like, irreplaceable riverfront land, they tend to outperform the broader market. They are the ultimate hard asset. When the money supply expands, assets with a fixed supply reprice upward to absorb that new liquidity.
So the macro thesis holds up. Now let's look at the OpEx. It's one thing to buy a ranch. It's another thing to keep it. Pillar 5, operational efficiency. Talk to me about the carrying costs.
This is one of the strongest pillars of the entire deal. The property is currently under a 1D1 wildlife management exemption.
For the uninitiated, can you briefly explain 1D1?
Sure. In Texas, land can be appraised for its productive capacity rather than its market value if it's used for agriculture. Historically, that meant running cattle or goats. But the law allows you to convert that to wildlife management. So instead of running livestock, you actively manage the habitat for native species, deer, turkey, songbirds. The tax benefit is identical to the traditional agricultural exemption, but the operational burden is often much lower and more aligned with conservation goals.
Okay, so what's the bottom line number? What are the taxes?
The annual property taxes are approximately $18,000.
$18,000 on an asset valued at nearly $20 million.
That's correct. It equates to a carrying cost of less than 0.1%.
That is exceptionally efficient, almost frictionless.
It creates a holding vehicle that you can maintain almost indefinitely without it creating a drag on your liquidity. If you were paying standard market value taxes on $20 million, you'd be looking at, what, $300,000 or $400,000 a year. That kind of cash flow drag forces you to eventually sell. At $18,000 a year, you can hold this asset for generations.
Now, let's clarify the compliance aspect. Is this a loophole? Is this something the state of Texas is going to close down?
It is not a loophole. It is a contract with the state. The state wants private landowners to engage in habitat preservation. But you have to do the work. It requires active, documented management. The dossier notes that this property is professionally managed by a firm called Landmark Wildlife Management, LLC.
So the compliance is effectively outsourced.
Exactly. Landmark handles the predator control. They manage the supplemental water and food sources. They do the brush management. The report shows they are meeting 6 out of 7 qualifying practices. For example, in the last year, they documented the removal of feral hogs and targeted mesquite control on about 15 acres.
So the owner doesn't have to be out there with a chainsaw every weekend to maintain the tax break.
No. It's a managed asset. You
Yeah.
pay the management fee. They file the annual reports with the county, and you keep the exemption. It turns the ranch into what we'd call a structurally efficient long-term hold.
It effectively negates the carrying cost risk. Okay, let's move to the legal structure. Pillar 6, unencumbered optionality.
This is a critical point for any family office buyer or a high net worth individual thinking about the next generation. The title is fee simple, and it is completely unencumbered. There are no existing conservation easements on the property.
Which means the owner has total control.
Total control. A sophisticated buyer has a menu of powerful options here. Option 1 is simple. Hold it unrestricted, keep it exactly as it is for family use, for recreation, forever. Option 2, compound development. Because there are no restrictions preventing it, you could, in theory, build 3 more homes for the next generation. You could add a helipad. You have the right to develop.
Here, what's the third option?
The conservation easement play. This is the sophisticated financial move. At some point in the future, the owner could choose to donate the development rights to a qualified land trust like the Nature Conservancy or the Texas Agricultural Land Trust. You voluntarily place a legal restriction on the land, preventing it from ever being subdivided. In exchange for that charitable donation, the IRS can grant a significant tax deduction based on the appraised value of those development rights you just gave up.
So you're buying what we call embedded financial optionality. You can effectively monetize the development value of the land without ever actually selling the land. You just sell the right to develop it and you get paid in tax credit.
That's precisely it. But you can only do that because it is currently unencumbered. If you buy a ranch that already has an easement in place, that value has already been stripped out by a previous owner. Here, that value is intact. You're holding all the cards.
That is a very powerful lever to have in the portfolio. It's a hidden asset. Let's zoom out to the final structural argument. Pillar 7, generational timing. Why now?
We need to look at the timeline of the entire region. This property has been in the same family for 40 years. As we noted earlier, it's a part of the Gideon Thompson legacy. The trend line in the Texas Hill Country is, frankly, relentless fragmentation. Large, historic ranches often die when the patriarch or matriarch passes. They get cut up into 50-acre ranchettes or, worse, subdivisions.
The subdivision death spiral.
Exactly. The supply of 700-plus acre live water tracts is mathematically shrinking. Every single year, there are fewer of them because another one gets chopped up. They are not making any more Sabinal River frontage. The supply is fixed and diminishing.
So this is fundamentally a supply compression thesis.
It is. We're witnessing a rare liquidity event. Assets of this caliber, with this kind of history and these specific attributes, they typically trade once every generation. They do not trade every market cycle. If this property sells to another long-term family who puts it into a trust, it might not see the open market again until 2075 or later.
That's the reality. You aren't just competing with other buyers in the market, you are competing with time. If you miss this window, the window may close for another 30 or 40 years.
And in a tightening inventory environment, securing the foundational asset now is the only way to guarantee you have that position. Waiting for a better or cheaper river ranch to come along is a strategy with a very low probability of success because that inventory simply doesn't exist.
All right, a compelling case. Let's bring this to a close. We've unpacked the asset from every angle. Let's just synthesize the investment pillars one last time.
We have a scarce asset. It's top percentile river frontage that is statistically almost impossible to replicate. We have a water-secure asset, dual bank river, plus redundant wells, plus the grandfathered irrigation permit.
We have a tax-efficient asset. The carrying costs are less than 0.1%, which is almost zero friction. And we have a stabilized asset. It's turnkey infrastructure that would cost a fortune and probably 5 years to build today from scratch.
And finally, we have an unencumbered asset. It comes with full legal optionality to develop, to hold, or to conserve as a future portfolio strategy requires.
So the verdict.
The asset validates. For long-duration capital that is seeking a defensible position and embedded legacy utility, this is a green light. It perfectly balances the defensive safety of hard land with the offensive growth potential of true scarcity.
I agree completely. It passes the capital stress test. And I'll leave it with this final thought. You can buy gold, you can buy stocks, you can buy crypto, but you can't take your grandkids fishing on a stock certificate. Unlike most portfolio positions, this one can be walked, fished, and transferred intact.
That is the ultimate non-negotiable value proposition.